So today's staff collections training is going to be on the 1932 Harley-Davidson V motorcycle. And this motorcycle was originally loaned to the museum on September 1st, 1983 by a man named Lloyd Roberts. It was then transformed into a donation in November of 1991.
I happen to know Lloyd Roberts. He was a local surgeon and was into motorcycles and enjoyed buying and restoring and selling motorcycles. I usually saw him on a BMW, but he came to one of our early auctions and bought two basket case motorcycles, which are our 1919 Harley-Davidson. It's out in the Women Who Dare, right under the TV set. And he also bought the 1932 Henderson KJ. And they were, like I say, they were basket case bikes. And the volunteers here got to work on the 1919 Harley and got that restored. Like many restorations, it still needs a few things, but if you look at it quickly, you'll say, okay, that's a complete bike. Still missing the lights, in case anybody has lights to a 1919 they'd like to donate. That would be really nice. That's how we finish things up around here. And the Henderson, four-cylinder Henderson, very rare motorcycle. We'll do a talk on that one in the future. And that was probably a 35-year restoration project that had just gotten started when I arrived here in 1982 and finally got running and riding condition when Ron Quebec showed up here maybe 5 years ago. What we're looking at here is a 1932 Harley Model V. It, like was said, it was bought by Lloyd Roberts. It was sent out to Harbor Vintage Motorcycle Repair Restoration Shop in Vermont, and came back the way you see it here. Lloyd was very concerned that we wouldn't bang up his motorcycle and wouldn't let anybody ride it until he saw me riding other antique motorcycles, and then he let me ride it, and then eventually he donated it to the museum. We don't have too many motorcycle riders here, but we have a few. So they're not easy to ride. So anyway, this motorcycle is a Model V, which is the lowest in horsepower model of the 1932 Harleys. They made a 45 cubic inch one. This one is a 74, but it's got less competition stuff on it. The more competition items that go on these motorcycles, Harley's way of figuring things out was they'd add letters to that. So it could be a VLD. There's a motorcycle of 34. Harley sitting over there is a VFD. That one's equipped for sidecar use and that sort of thing. This one is a flathead. In 32, they were building flatheads. Prior to this, they were building F-heads. And what that means is a flathead, the valves are moving up and down in the cylinder, not in the heads. There's no moving parts in the head. An F-head has the intake valve opening and closing in the head, but the exhaust opens and closes in the cylinder. So that's an F-head. And then overhead valves, which you see mostly today, is the valves open and close over. They have push rods and rocker arms and all that. So this is a flathead. Flatheads make for a very smooth running motorcycle, but not extremely powerful, but they were very durable. 32 had a rigid frame, which they were still making up into the early 50s, and what's commonly referred to as a Springer front end, which articulates for springing, and it only moves about 3 inches. Most of the comfort springing suspension is right in the seat. So you sit on it and the bike is bouncing around underneath you, and which is a little disconcerting when you're riding on potholy roads and over railroad tracks and that sort of stuff. It's a 3-speed and chain drive. You heard me talk about the spark, advance, and retard on vehicles like the Model Ts and the earlier. These motorcycles had that too. That's on your left control. You roll it out. That's spark retard. As the engine starts, you run it back. That's spark advance. And then the throttle is here. Okay, but it's not spring loaded. It doesn't spring back. So if you dump the motorcycle, it's still going to rev and kick dust, and you have a hard time getting the thing back. So this one has crash bars. They don't call them crash bars anymore because people get excited when they hear the word crash. So these are safety bars now. They're not crash bars anymore. And it has a back swing stand and a side stand. One of the things that's cool about this is it's got a main gas tank, and it's got a secondary gas tank in case you run out of gas here, and then the oil goes in here. It's a total loss oil system, meaning that the oil that you put in here is eventually going to leak out the bottom. It lubricates all the parts and then leaks out the bottom. We wouldn't like that much today anyway. And that's where Harley-Davidson and all the early motorcycles got the reputation of being leaky. They're really not leaking per se. They're doing what they were designed to do. Harley finally in 1936 or 7 designed a motorcycle where the oil completely circulated through the engine and back to the tank. And that eliminated some of the leak. But you still have to lubricate the chains, and that's done basically out in the open, and that still leaks and leaves a puddle on the floor, which is kind of why we have cans under them all the time. A little bit about Harley-Davidson history. Just like the Wright brothers and Henry Ford, they really got started in 1903. And they built a motorcycle that they deemed a failure in 1903, and then redesigned it and built a successful motorcycle in 1904. Single cylinder, belt drive. It was good. It was a loop frame design. And by loop frame, that means that the engine is held in by a big loop. If you see Indian motorcycles, they're a diamond frame design. It's like a bicycle frame, and the engine fits inside that diamond. You can't get a really big engine in there, but in a loop frame, you can get quite a large engine. And so that was revolutionary for all motorcycle manufacturers by about 1909, and made for a very strong, durable, tractable motorcycle. Motorcycles were actually more popular than cars real early. Motorcycle development happened along the same lines as cars, but motorcycles, if you could figure out a way to attach an engine to a bicycle, you had a motorcycle. Not so with a car. And so motorcycles were very popular early on. They were used with sidecars for delivery, post office, general store, police, that sort of thing. And then cars started to take over, but when the Model T came along, it just blew motorcycles out of the water. I mean, you could buy a Model T for half the price of a motorcycle and have twice the transportation access. You could put your goats in the back and your chickens in the front and go to market. Motorcycle, not so. So motorcycles, rather than die, became a sport vehicle. They went racing, and clubs developed and that sort of thing for touring. And there was a lot of competition because that's what they were generally morphed into, competition machines. Indian and Harley had a competition war for quite a long time. In fact, I think it still goes on. And so anyway, any questions on this? Because you guys come up with better questions than I could just think off the top of my head. Nobody knows. They're all scared of motorcycles.
So you were talking about the oil
Yeah.
leaking on purpose. Did it actually leak onto the chain on purpose?
There is a chain lube pipe that does drip onto the chain. Yes. Yeah. That's part of the whole lube system. There is an oil pump in the engine. It's under this case, and so it's constantly throwing oil around, but it doesn't have any way to get the oil back in the tank. So it just basically leaks out the bottom. It's called total loss oil system. There are other oiling systems that were out there at the time. This is an interesting feature I'll show you. We'll see if anybody can figure it out. This is in the gas tank, obviously. Any guesses?
We have no staff in the state of Maine currently, and
You would think so, but actually, the bike has a pressure pump. It's right here. If you haven't run the bike for a while, you want to pump that a few times, and that gets oil into the engine, all right? And you have a valve on the side of the engine that you can open. That if you don't know how much oil's in the engine, you drain it all off, and you give that 4 pumps, and that's the right amount of oil to start with. If the bike smokes, you got too much in there. If you're racing, you give it a pump every now and again.
You're pressurizing the gas tank?
No, but we're on the right track. What it is a syringe, all right? And each cylinder has a little cap that opens up that allows gas to get in the cylinder. So you put this in the gas, and you pull this out, and it fills this full of gasoline. And then it's got a little pointy end on it, and you put it on that primer cup. That's what they're called, primer cups. Give it half a stroke on one, and then a half a stroke on the other. And now you're primed to start. It's got a choke. When it's this kind of temperature out, you really don't need to prime it. You just set the choke, kick it 3 or 4 times, turn the choke off, turn the ignition on. It's got a foot clutch, not a hand clutch like modern motorcycles. This is the front brake. And then make sure it's in neutral. Turn the key on, kick start it. This is the rear brakes. And with the key on, it should go. Any other questions? Boy, it's a quiet bunch.
Thanks,
So
Warren.
Harley-Davidson is the only American motorcycle company still making motorcycles. There are people that argue that Indian is back in business and all that, but they broke their DNA chain when Indian closed in the 1954 or so. And then other companies adopted the Indian name and tried to pick up on the vibe. But if you want to be truthful about the matter, HD, Harley-Davidson, is still the only American motorcycle manufacturer. They sold the rights to build these motorcycles to Japan before World War II. So you can have a Japanese Harley-Davidson, basically. It was a different name, like Hoku or something like that. I forget what it was called. They built them out of the country. So Harley-Davidson sold out to AMF, but retained the rights to their own company. AMF owned the company, but they didn't run the company. So we let them get by with that because it was still the same management team, same factory, building the Harley-Davidson under the Harley-Davidson name. And then Harleys became popular because us baby boomers, who all wanted Harleys when we were kids, were able to buy more. So there was a big upsurge, and Harley-Davidson bought back its own company. So Harley is owned by Harley again. And it's William Harley and the Davidson brothers. There was a little debate over whether they should call it Harley-Davidson or Davidson-Harley, and they decided it sounded better at Harley-Davidson, and that's the way it's been. There was a sister in there somewhere too who did the original striping on the 1904 motorcycles. Yeah. And #1 Harley-Davidson is still out there somewhere, I think. There was a motorcycle shop in Boston who had it, and then they closed, and the owner retired and went to Florida, and that's the last anybody saw of that bike. Harley-Davidson Company has a motorcycle. They claim that it's #1, but if everybody was honest, that you can make a claim, but it's not been proven, because it doesn't answer the question, well, where did the one that was in Boston go, the #1? A good book on the whole subject. It was called At the Creation, written by a fellow named Wagner. Anybody interested in Harley-Davidson motorcycle history, that's a great book to read. So try to start it?
Sure.
Start it, Warren.
All right. So I have to turn the gas on. I have to turn the choke on. And because all the batteries have master switches, turn the master switch on. And kick it over a few times. This is what runs since last summer.
Yeah.
Turn the choke off. Turn the key on. Say a small prayer. Retard the spark. What's rule number 1? What's rule number 1?
Retard the spark.
There you go.
I can't believe that started right up. Yeah, that was amazing.
I'll turn the
It
battery
sounds
off.
great too. The motor sounds great.
Oh yeah, thank you, Dr. Lloyd Roberts.
Thanks, Warren.
Certainly,
Yeah.
certainly.